began with something so small, so ordinary, that the Perron family could not have imagined what was waiting for them inside their new home. On their very first night in the old Rhode Island farmhouse, Carolyn Perron awoke to the sound of faint rustling in the hallway outside her bedroom door. At first, she assumed it was one of her 5 daughters out of bed, but when she rose to check, the hallway was empty. Still, she heard it again, the sound of a broom sliding softly across the wooden floorboards. When she went into the kitchen, she found the broom leaning against the wall. Yet moments earlier, she had left it lying flat across the counter. The next morning, her daughters began whispering to each other about footsteps, about shadows that seemed to watch them from the corners of their rooms. One of them swore she felt a tug on her hair while she slept, though no one had been near her bed. Another claimed her blankets had been pulled down to the floor in the night. And each morning, Carolyn discovered small piles of dirt scraped across the kitchen floor, as though someone had been sweeping in the dark while the family slept. What was moving through that house in the night? Who, or what, had claimed it long before the Perrons ever stepped through the front door? Before we go deeper into this chilling tale, take a moment to tell me in the comments, where in the world, and at what time, are you listening to this story? I'd love to know how far this haunting has traveled, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more chilling horror history for sleep, always accompanied by the soft sound of rain to keep you company in the dark. The Perron family's story began in January of 1971, when Roger and Carolyn Perron purchased a sprawling farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. It was the kind of home people dream of, a rustic property built in the 1700s, complete with old stone walls, weathered wood, and acres of land. For Roger and Carolyn, it seemed the perfect place to raise their 5 daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April. The house had history, yes, but that was part of its charm. They had no idea just how much history it carried, or how much of it refused to stay buried. At first, the disturbances were subtle, almost easy to ignore. A door creaking open on its own, a faint whisper when no one else was in the room, the smell of rotting flesh drifting through the halls for no reason, only to vanish seconds later. The girls would wake to find their toys moved from where they had left them. Sometimes Carolyn noticed small household objects missing entirely. Spoons, little trinkets, even photographs. Days later, they would reappear in impossible places, tucked into corners, or perched on shelves far out of reach. But it didn't take long for the presence inside the farmhouse to grow bolder. Carolyn began to hear faint voices in the night, murmurs that seemed to float through the halls. Sometimes she thought she could make out words, though they never sounded friendly. The daughters complained of beds shaking softly beneath them. One even described a figure standing in the corner of her room, a woman in gray, silently watching. And the animals on the property seemed disturbed as well. Their dog refused to enter certain rooms. Horses startled at nothing. Even the family cat would hiss and scratch at empty air. Neighbors, too, seemed strangely cautious when asked about the house. Some avoided the topic altogether. Others offered only vague warnings that the property had seen tragedy, that it was better left alone. Still, the Perrons had invested everything into the farmhouse. Leaving was not an option. They told themselves that perhaps the house was simply settling, that their imaginations were running away from them. But deep down, Carolyn knew something wasn't right. The house was too old, too heavy with secrets. And then there were the stories of the dead. The land the Perron farmhouse stood on had passed through many families since the 1700s. Whispers told of suicides, of murders, of drownings. Children had died mysteriously, neighbors had gone missing. There were even tales of ritual sacrifices carried out in the woods nearby. And within the farmhouse itself, more than one person was said to have hanged themselves, their bodies discovered swinging from beams inside the very rooms the Perrons now called their own. The family had only been there a matter of weeks, and yet the atmosphere in the home had already shifted into something suffocating. Carolyn felt it most of all. She began to feel as though she were constantly being watched, her every move followed by eyes she could not see. She often woke in the night with a crushing weight on her chest, as though someone invisible were pinning her down. One evening, she saw it clearly. As she passed by the dining room, she noticed a figure seated quietly at the head of the table. A man, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, staring directly at her. She froze in terror, but in the blink of an eye, he was gone. Carolyn tried to convince herself it had been her imagination, but the longer the family lived there, the more the line between imagination and reality blurred. The farmhouse, as beautiful as it seemed from the outside, was no longer a home. It was becoming a cage, and the Perrons were its unwilling captives. And still, the most terrifying part of the haunting had yet to begin. The whispers, the shadows, the phantom touches were only the beginning. Soon, the Perrons would learn the name of the spirit who seemed to command the house. A name spoken in fear and whispered like a curse. Section 2. Bathsheba Sherman's Curse. The Perron family had grown used to whispers, shadows, and flickering lights, but nothing could have prepared them for the name that locals reluctantly shared. Bathsheba Sherman. Who was she? And why did her presence linger so powerfully in the farmhouse, centuries after her death? Bathsheba Thayer Sherman was a woman who lived in the mid-1800s, right there in Harrisville, Rhode Island. She married a farmer and moved into a house near the Perron property. By all accounts, she was a harsh, cold woman, rumored to have a cruel streak, not just with her animals, but with her own children. In fact, the most infamous story tied to Bathsheba was that she had once sacrificed an infant on her land as part of a satanic ritual, driving a sewing needle straight into the child's skull. She was tried in court, but the case was dismissed for lack of evidence. Still, her reputation never recovered. To neighbors, she was a witch. To her community, she was cursed. Legend says Bathsheba dedicated her soul to the devil, gaining supernatural power at the cost of her humanity. When she died, some say by hanging herself in her barn, others claim by old age. The whispers declared that her spirit did not move on. Instead, it anchored itself to the land, determined to torment anyone who dared to live there. And for the Perrons, it seemed Bathsheba had chosen Carolyn as her personal target. It began with Carolyn waking up with strange marks on her skin. Tiny punctures, like needle pricks, scattered across her body. She often felt sudden stabbing pains, sharp and unnatural, as though someone invisible had driven something into her flesh. At night, she dreamed of a woman with hollow eyes, snarling teeth, and a rope coiled in her hands. Sometimes she claimed she could see this figure standing at the foot of her bed, watching silently. The daughters noticed it too. Andrea, the eldest, later recalled seeing what she described as a grotesque face, twisted with rage, hovering in the shadows. The figure would hiss, its voice like a rasping growl. More than once, Carolyn reported hearing a shrill voice whispering, "Get out! Leave this house!" But Carolyn couldn't leave. The family had nowhere else to go. Instead, she began to wither under Bathsheba's torment. Her health declined, she lost weight, became pale, and often fell ill for no reason. It was as if something was draining her, feeding on her life. The haunting escalated into open attacks. Carolyn was once thrown across the room by an unseen force, slamming into the wall with such violence that her daughters screamed in terror. Objects flew through the air, plates, books, even heavy furniture. The farmhouse grew colder, darker, almost alive with hostility. And yet, there were moments of eerie calm, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. The Perrons would sit together, afraid to move, listening as faint footsteps circled them from the empty upstairs rooms. Sometimes doors would slam one by one, as if announcing the arrival of something unseen. What terrified them most was that Bathsheba's rage seemed focused on Carolyn. It was not random, it was personal. Carolyn would later say she felt as if Bathsheba despised her, saw her as a rival, and wanted her destroyed. One night, Carolyn woke to a horrifying vision. A woman crouched beside her bed, her head twisted at an unnatural angle, her skin gray and rotting, with jagged teeth bared. The figure hissed a single word, "Mine," before vanishing into the darkness. Carolyn was left trembling, drenched in sweat, knowing she was being claimed by something evil. By this point, the Perron family had no choice but to seek help. But who could they turn to? Who would believe them if they told the truth about the shadows, the screams, the attacks? There was only one answer. Ed and Lorraine Warren, the famed paranormal investigators who had built their reputation on cases exactly like this. But would even the Warrens be able to help them? Or would the Perrons' nightmare only grow darker once the Warrens stepped inside the cursed farmhouse? Section 3, the Warrens enter the farmhouse. By the time the Perrons reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, they were a family living on the edge of collapse. Fear had become routine. Sleep was rare. The children huddled together at night, listening to doors slam, glass shatter, and whispers echo through the farmhouse. Carolyn, pale and weakened, was slipping further into Bathsheba's grip. When Ed and Lorraine Warren arrived at the Perron farmhouse in 1974, they were immediately struck by the heaviness that seemed to cling to the air. Lorraine, a clairvoyant and medium, later said that from the moment she crossed the threshold, she felt the presence of something ancient, oppressive, and deeply malevolent. It wasn't just a haunted house, it was a battlefield between the living and the dead. Lorraine S. visions confirmed what the parents feared. Bathsheba Sherman S. spirit was in the house, and she had targeted Carolyn specifically. According to Lorraine, Bathsheba was furious that another woman now occupied her land, and she would stop at nothing to claim it or destroy it. The Warrens began their investigation cautiously. They recorded sounds, interviewed the family, and documented the violent occurrences. Ed, a demonologist, warned the Perrons that they were not dealing with a simple haunting, but a powerful demonic attachment. He explained that the house had likely seen generations of suffering, suicides, murders, and deaths, creating a perfect storm for something evil to thrive. But Lorraine's visions made things even more horrifying. During one session, she claimed she saw Bathsheba standing directly behind Carolyn, her skeletal hand resting on Carolyn's shoulder, whispering into her ear. Lorraine described her as having a broken neck, her head bent unnaturally, her skin charred as though burned by some unseen fire. The Perron children also confirmed Lorraine's claims. Andrea Perron, the eldest daughter, remembered nights when her mother's body would stiffen and her voice would change. Carolyn would speak in a guttural, unnatural tone, shouting obscenities no one had ever heard her use before. It was as if Bathsheba was trying to crawl inside her body, to use her as a vessel. The Warrens organized a seance inside the farmhouse, hoping to draw out the spirit and sever its hold. The family sat around the table, trembling, while Lorraine entered a trance. Almost immediately, the room grew icy cold, and a terrible smell filled the air. Sulfur, rot, and something metallic like blood. Then it happened. Carolyn began to convulse violently. Her chair lifted into the air and crashed back down with such force that the wooden legs splintered. She screamed, but it wasn't her scream. The sound was guttural, inhuman, echoing as though two voices were speaking at once. The children cried out, begging the Warrens to stop. Lorraine shouted prayers, calling on divine power to banish the entity. But Bathsheba fought back. Lights shattered, furniture toppled, and an unseen force hurled Carolyn across the room. She landed hard, her body limp, her eyes rolled back into her head. For a moment, everyone feared she was gone. Then, with one final gasp, Carolyn came to. She was weak, shaking, her voice barely a whisper as she begged Ed and Lorraine, "Please, make it stop." The seance ended, but the Perrons knew this was not the end of their nightmare. Bathsheba had not been defeated. If anything, she was angrier, more determined than ever to claim her victim. The farmhouse remained steeped in darkness. Every creak, every whisper, every slam of a door was a reminder that the Warrens had only scratched the surface of the evil that lurked within. But here ends the chilling part. The Warrens themselves admitted that there were limits to what they could do. They could fight, they could pray, but the land itself seemed cursed, a place where Bathsheba's grip might never truly be broken. And as the Perrons would soon learn, the spirit's most terrifying attack had yet to come. Section 4, Living with the Darkness. The seance had shaken everyone to their core. Carolyn was left exhausted, her body weakened, and her spirit broken. But Bathsheba was not gone. If anything, the events seemed to give the spirit more strength. From that point on, the Perrons realized they were not fighting a battle they could win. They were simply struggling to survive. Night after night, the farmhouse was alive with disturbances. Doors opened on their own, chairs scraped across wooden floors, and whispers echoed through the halls. The children recalled seeing dark figures lurking in their bedrooms, standing at the foot of their beds, watching. Andrea, the eldest, described one moment where she awoke to see a woman in tattered clothing, her head hanging at a broken angle, standing silently beside her bed. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The figure simply dissolved into the shadows before her eyes. But it was Carolyn who bore the brunt of Bathsheba's wrath. She would often feel unseen hands pressing against her chest, pinning her to her bed. At times, she claimed to smell rotting flesh and hear a voice hissing her name. The family watched helplessly as Carolyn drifted further away from them, trapped between reality and the spirit's grip. The Warrens returned several times, but they too admitted that Bathsheba was a formidable force. Unlike other hauntings, there was no simple exorcism to end it. The farmhouse itself was steeped in centuries of tragedy. Long before the Perrons, the land had been witness to suicides, murders, and countless unexplained deaths. Bathsheba may have been the most infamous, but she was far from the only soul tied to the property. As the months turned into years, the family learned to coexist with the spirits. Some were benign, almost protective, but others were violent, unpredictable, and cruel. Andrea Perron later said that it felt as though the house itself was alive, breathing, watching, feeding on their fear. Eventually, the Perrons made the agonizing decision to leave. It was not easy. Financial struggles kept them trapped in the house far longer than they wanted, forcing them to endure nearly a decade of torment. But even after they left, the haunting followed them in memories, in dreams, and in the way shadows seemed to cling to their family. And what of the farmhouse today? It still stands in Rhode Island, a simple colonial home on the outside, but one that carries with it a reputation that few dare challenge. Paranormal investigators continue to visit, and many report the same experiences the Perrons endured decades ago. Objects moving, voices in the night, sudden drops in temperature, and a feeling of being watched. The land is still marked by Bathsheba Sherman's curse. Her story, twisted by rumor and history, remains tied to the foundation of the home. Some say she walks the halls, forever seeking a victim. Others believe the spirits of those who died on the property are trapped there, bound by tragedy. The Perrons survived, but the question lingers. Did Bathsheba truly let them go? Or did she simply wait, biding her time, for the next family to cross the threshold of her cursed home? And that, perhaps, is the most chilling truth of all. That in the quiet of the Rhode Island countryside, behind weathered walls and beneath creaking floors, the darkness never really left. It waits.